Let's dive right into this explainer because today we're looking at a genuinely groundbreaking text that completely transforms how we understand adults living with attention deficit disorder. For years, the prevailing belief was that ADD was basically just a childhood issue, right? Something you'd eventually just grow out of. But what happens when you don't? What happens when those underlying neurological differences carry right over into your adult life, your career, and your relationships? Well, today we're unpacking the incredibly validating insights from the book You Mean I'm Not Lazy, Stupid, or Crazy, a self-help guide written specifically by and for adults with ADD. If you, or maybe someone you love, has ADD, you probably know the haunting cycle of disapproval all too well. Many adults have grown up bombarded by deeply painful labels from teachers, parents, and just society in general. You might have heard phrases exactly like these. If you would just try harder, you could do it. Or, you're too smart to get such terrible grades. Because the true handicap of ADD is hidden, people mistakenly assume that the erratic behavior, the messy rooms, and the forgotten assignments are intentional choices. And over a lifetime, those repeated criticisms become your internal monologue. You actually start to believe that you are, in fact, lazy, stupid, or just crazy. But we are going to shatter that stigma right now by asking a simple but absolutely powerful question about your lifelong struggles. What if literally none of these labels are true? What if you never started your day with a plan to drive everyone crazy, but rather you were simply trying to navigate a world that just wasn't built for the way your brain is wired? Let's jump into section 1, not lazy, stupid, or crazy. Here's our first major paradigm shift. We need to reframe ADD from a source of shame into what it actually is, a hidden, misunderstood handicap. To do this, the authors suggest the absolute first step to recovery is repeating this mantra to yourself. I am not lazy, stupid, or crazy. You literally have to say it until you replace your old negative self-perceptions with a scientifically validated understanding of your brain. Think about it. You wouldn't tell a person in a wheelchair that they could just get up and walk if they simply tried harder, right? Well, an ADD adult is dealing with a very real limitation. It just happens to be invisible. Recognizing that your behavior is rooted in biology and not some character flaw is the absolute foundation of taking back control of your life. Moving right along to section 2, we're unpacking the big 3. When we break down the core symptoms of ADD, we often find they manifest in incredibly paradoxical ways. Now, these are the big 3 symptoms: inattention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. But as we're about to see, they look very, very different in adults compared to that stereotypical image of a little kid bouncing off the classroom walls. We usually have a highly simplified view of these symptoms, but the reality of adult ADD is vastly more complex, layered, and frankly, pretty fascinating. Take a look at this, because it brilliantly illustrates how an attention deficit isn't just a short attention span. It's actually a problem with the entire process of attending. You see, attention involves choosing a focus, sustaining it, dividing it, and shifting it. A malfunction in any of these areas looks drastically different. On one hand, you have a procrastinator. They can't selectively focus because every single sight, sound, and passing thought is fighting for their attention, making it basically impossible to even start a task. But on the other hand, you have the workaholic. They can sustain focus perfectly fine, but they completely lose the ability to shift it. They become so engrossed in a task that they might forget to eat, drink, or even blink for 6 hours straight. So it's not a lack of attention, it's an inability to regulate it. Similarly, hyperactivity isn't just about moving around too much. In adults, it very often transforms into this deep internal restlessness. So while it can mean physical fidgeting, it can also manifest as verbal overactivity, talking so fast you barely pause for a breath, driven by words that feel like they just have to get out right now. And even more surprisingly, hyperactivity's exact opposite, deep lethargy and hypoactivity, is incredibly common. Many ADD adults fluctuate wildly between moving at mega speed and feeling like they're operating in slow motion, barely able to muster the energy to even move. Which brings us to section 3. Inside the ADD brain. So to understand the why behind all these behaviors, we have to take a journey directly inside your biology. Think of your brain and central nervous system as a brilliant but highly dysregulated command center. It's responsible for sending, receiving, and coordinating all messages, as well as regulating your state of alertness. In an ADD brain, this entire system just functions erratically. The messenger system doesn't always deliver the mail on time, which leads directly to the wildly inconsistent performance that so many ADD adults experience day to day. Let's look a little closer at the brain's internal postal system. Messages travel down nerve cells as electrical impulses, right? But to get to the next cell, they have to cross this tiny gap called a synapse. To do that, they rely on chemical messengers, or neurotransmitters, to basically carry the signal across. Research suggests that ADD might actually involve an insufficient quantity of certain neurotransmitters, like dopamine. Without enough dopamine, the messages fail to properly bridge those gaps between nerve cells, and boom, you get a breakdown in communication. And this breakdown creates what essentially amounts to a short in the brain's wiring. Specifically, this happens in the communication feedback loop between two absolutely critical areas: the frontal lobes, which regulate executive functions like planning and behavior, and the reticular activating system, which is the fascinating part of the brain that controls how alert and awake you feel. Because this wiring is literally short-circuiting, an adult with ADD might perform brilliantly on a Tuesday and then struggle to process basic instructions on Wednesday. It is absolutely not about willpower, it is purely about biology. All right, moving to section 4, the cycle of disapproval. So when this biological wiring collides with a world that entirely expects conformity, it creates friction at literally every single stage of life. Because ADD is an inherent trait, it builds up this heavy baggage of failure over time. In infancy, it often starts with irregular sleep and relentless crying. As toddlers, ADD children might enter a phase of the terrible twos that seemingly never ends. By elementary school, academic and social friction spikes as the kid struggles in a very rigid classroom setting. In adolescence, high school feels like a fast-moving assembly line, and the ADD teenager often just falls right off this educational conveyor belt. Finally, in adulthood, all these lifelong struggles culminate in a wildly unpredictable emotional roller coaster as you try to balance careers, finances, and relationships with an intensely dysregulated nervous system. And this lifelong friction triggers what the authors call the toxic theory of blame. Society, teachers, and yes, even well-meaning parents falsely assume that these neurological differences are just intentional, maliciously planned misbehaviors. You hear people say things like, well, I would never allow my child to act like that, completely ignoring the biological reality of the individual. As a result, many ADD adults grow up externalizing this blame, either lashing out at the world or internalizing all that shame. Overcoming this toxic theory of blame is absolutely critical for true self-acceptance. Which brings us to our final section. Number 5, differently wired, not defective. Because here is the ultimate paradigm shift. Being differently wired absolutely does not mean you are defective. Let's look at how these supposed deficits are actually incredible assets. Many ADD adults operate on a one-channel system because their brain's filtering mechanism is basically defective. If they try to scan multiple channels at once, like cooking dinner while listening to the kids, everything falls apart. But wait, this exact same defective filter gives you the powerful ability to lock in to a single task. By shutting down all other channels, you can engage in an incredible, unshakable hyperfocus. You can work on a creative project, write code, or analyze data for hours on end in a way that non-ADD individuals simply cannot match. And what about the wandering mind? Sure, a wandering mind gets you in trouble for daydreaming during a really boring staff meeting, but that exact same mental free flight is absolutely incredible. It's exactly what allows you to be a visionary and see the big picture. While everyone else is bogged down in sequential, conventional details, the ADD mind is constantly roaming, making brilliant, unconventional connections. If you can learn to harness this wandering mind, it becomes an incredibly powerful asset in creative professions, the arts, and entrepreneurial leadership. Finally, we have the dynamic of the bottomless pit of needs. ADD adults often feel this intense, insatiable craving for stimulation, which, yes, can sometimes lead to risky behaviors or burnout. However, that intense, unyielding drive and thrill-seeking mentality can be intentionally redirected. That same restless energy can make you a highly successful, engaging professional in fast-paced fields like sales, public relations, or emergency response. These are fields where high stakes and continuous novelty are literally the keys to hitting the jackpot. So as you look at your life through this new lens, finally removing those old labels of lazy, stupid, or crazy, and instead really understanding your unique biological wiring, I want to leave you with one final provocative question to ponder. As you navigate your career, your relationships, and your self-image, are you simply struggling with a disorder, or are you actually equipped with a powerful ADD dimension? Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and I genuinely hope this new perspective helps you discover the remarkable abilities hidden right there within your differences.